Welcome to Statmasters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football, better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. And my co host is Chris Buonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
So we're going to break down how it seems like nobody understands the Dallas Cowboys. So we're just going to run down the whole team. And I'll tell you why nobody understands the Dallas Cowboys. And Aaron, you're very familiar with this, being a Dallas Cowboys fan yourself and a Texas native. The Dallas Cowboys are a very easy team to hate on, especially with Jerry Jones and Skip Bayless and the media that surrounds this team. I mean, I enjoy a good old hate sesh for the Dallas Cowboys. It's a lot of fun, and they certainly ask for it. But a lot of times that hate can then get misinterpreted into the fantasy football evaluation of this team, even if it's slightly. And today I'm definitely going to be griping over very slight miscalculations of player value for this team. And one of the other big things is the offensive coordinator switch from Kellen Moore to Brian Schottenheimer that people are massively overreacting to, because a lot of people really like Kellen Moore because he reminds you of the fantasy football approach of throw more, this and that. And no one likes Brian Schottenheimer because he's old and boring. But in reality, there's a reason Kellen Moore didn't stay in town. And even if you think he's a better coordinator than Schottenheimer, if he had poor cohesion with the rest of the coaching staff because of philosophy, you'd rather the guy who gets along. And either way, the fantasy football production here is not going to be throttled by Brian Schottenheimer. He has been part of the coaching staff for many championship teams and has coached many fantasy football champions. So I want to start with what I think is the most insulting ADP is CeeDee Lamb. And in such a way that we're not giving him enough respect. Now, you're going to say, but Chris, CeeDee Lamb is currently the wide receiver 7. Right, he's a 1-2 turn pick. I think that's disrespectful. I think he should be the wide receiver 4. I think it should be Jefferson, Chase, Hill, Lamb, and I don't think it's really that much of an argument. We've broken down AJ Brown on this show, and he's a very nice player, and he certainly deserves to be a top 8 receiver. But I think Lamb is slightly better and in a better situation this year. Diggs is obviously elite, but he's 29. He's not a spring chicken. And Cooper Kupp is also 29 going on 30. And he's coming off a season where he obliterated his ankle. We need to bake in the concern with Cooper Kupp's health. There's a chance Cooper Kupp could be similar, not the same, but similar to how Michael Thomas just never came back from his ankle injury. There's a chance Cooper Kupp comes back from the injury, but he's not full Cooper Kupp. And he's not worth the wide receiver 4. CeeDee Lamb gives you all the elite upside of Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, and he has none of the age risks. He's in the peak of his career. You look at the Cowboys depth chart. We'll talk about them more later, but Brandin Cooks and Michael Gallup are not significant threats to CeeDee Lamb's target share. The rest of the receivers are just guys. The tight ends are just guys. This entire Cowboys offense is going to revolve around CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard, and Dak Prescott. And everyone hates Dak Prescott, but Dak Prescott for years has spearheaded some of the most fantasy productive offenses. For years, I don't care that, yes, he has certainly fell short of playoff expectations. Yes, a better quarterback probably could have won a Super Bowl with this team by now. But in the regular season, you're not getting much better than Dak Prescott, especially for fantasy football and the ability to support a player. Now, looking at Lamb, last season, 28% target share is elite. 26 deep targets on that 28% target share is elite. 10.2 ADOT is not necessarily elite, but when you're a high volume player who also plays out of the slot a lot, number 6th overall in slot snaps, then you're going to have a lower ADOT. And this isn't an Amon-Ra St. Brown situation where Amon-Ra was 6 yards per target. This is 10. That's a good number. 9th in yards after catch. And you look at a lot of his stats are really nice, but they're not necessarily as important as number 6 in win rate versus man. So this dude is earning an incredible target share. He's running after the catch. He's playing all around the field. And he's 24. And he's really the only primary weapon in this passing game for a quarterback that can support what Lamb can do. This is a no miss situation at the 1-2 turn. You should be ecstatic to draft CeeDee Lamb if you start the draft at 10, because you're now caught up to the guys that got Jefferson and Chase. And the only reason Lamb is not considered in the same esteem as Jefferson and Chase is because it took him one more year to break out. He was a third-year breakout, right? Chase and Jefferson were essentially rookie breakouts, and more realistically so, sophomore year is when they actually broke fantasy. Like, Chase was certainly good his rookie year. We knew he was going to be elite, but it was the sophomore season that we really saw the numbers pop off the page. CeeDee Lamb was a junior breakout, but if you listen to JJ Zachariason and his, late round QB podcast, he's done plenty of research and analysis that goes to show that freshman, sophomore, and junior year breakout for players, they're all worth the same. All that matters is that you broke out. CeeDee Lamb is here. CeeDee Lamb should be the wide receiver 4, and he's my wide receiver 4, and I will not budge. Someone would really have to convince me otherwise.
CeeDee Lamb last season, his ADP on Underdog wasn't that far off from what it is this season. I remember teams I took him as pick 11, pick 12 on some best ball teams. What's changed this year? Nothing. Like, Amari Cooper was gone last year. We had some questions. It was okay to be skeptical of CeeDee Lamb. Can he produce as an alpha wide receiver? We hadn't seen it in those 2 years. Some good stuff. Cooper's gone. Boom. He flirts with 30% target share. Tell me how many 24-year-old wide receivers can do that? There's not much. CeeDee Lamb's legit. It may seem hot and spicy to say wide receiver 4 in 2023. We're getting ahead of the curve. Last season, this is PPR points. This is what we have to work with on Player Profiler. He was number 7 overall. Fantasy points per game, 17.7. And you can choose any advanced stat on his profile. I don't care. Choose any of them. He's probably elite at it. You mentioned it. He wins against man. He gets deep targets. Target share is crazy. Yards after the catch, he can do it. He caught over 100 passes. Yards per route run, he's top 10. Yards per team pass attempt, he's top 10. He's even elusive as well, because of course he is. These are what the elite wide receivers do. They just dominate at everything. CeeDee Lamb, he emerged in his 3rd year. He's going into his 4th season. He could get 30% target share. I wouldn't be surprised one bit. Like, what are the Cowboys going to do? Say, we saw enough of CeeDee Lamb last year and he was really good, and let's scale it back. Hell no. Hell no. Like, this offense is going to run through CeeDee Lamb. Wide receiver 4, definitely take that. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, top 4 guys right there. I'll buy it. And the thing I'll add too, when we look back to last season, remember Dak Prescott got hurt after week 1. Then we had to deal with backup quarterback play and Cooper Rush coming in. And when Dak Prescott came back, it was week 7 against the Lions. There was a little bit of rust. Wasn't a whole lot of passing. They blew out the Lions. Week 8 through the end of the season, including the playoffs, that's 12 games. 10 of those games, he scored 15 plus PPR points. Of those other 2 games, 1 game was against Minnesota. They beat the living hell out of the Vikings by 30 plus points. They didn't need to pass. They pulled starters in that game. CeeDee Lamb only ran 17 routes. The only other game, Houston Texans, which they actually had a pretty good secondary last season. But that's it. 12 games. CeeDee Lamb averaged 15 PPR points or more. Like, you're getting elite production at an insanely consistent pace there. CeeDee Lamb's exactly what you want if you're taking a receiver in the 1st round. So CeeDee Lamb, he's going to start rising in best ball. Get used to him being wide receiver 4.
Yeah, he used to go sometimes in the early 2nd round. Now, you don't see him. It's honestly even hard to get him at the turn. And yeah, very few guys, Aaron, to your point about the game logs, very few guys can flirt with a 38-point PPR week and a 34-point PPR week, yet alone 2 in the same season with a 15-point floor. He's very good, and this is now where the mainstream view on Dallas starts to get hypocritical, because people will say, oh, I can't take Lamb over Kupp, or over Diggs because of Brian Schottenheimer and because of Dak and because of this and that. For me, those are tiebreakers that move him down the top 10. But for me, it's no, this is all of the upside as everyone else in the top 10, but none of the risk. There's none of the risk of age with Diggs and Adams, none of the risk of injury with Kupp, and none of the risk of the unknown with Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, where, of course, we believe Wilson and St. Brown are very much top 10 talents, but it's still a projection to a degree where Lamb is not. And then you now look at other players on this team. So now we have Brandin Cooks and Michael Gallup who have elevated ADPs for what they're actually worth, because the argument is, oh, well, they're on the Cowboys. It's a good offense. But then CeeDee Lamb falls to the back end of the first round, and Tony Pollard still slips into the third round because it's the Cowboys. So which is it? Are the Cowboys good enough for CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard to win your league? Or they're so bad that I have to take other options over them? Or are they so good that Brandin Cooks and Michael Gallup will be better players than they actually are? Which is it? I'm going to go with, I want the elite players, Lamb and Pollard, and I'm not super hyped on Cooks and Gallup right now at their cost. At a cheaper cost, sure. But Brandin Cooks is the wide receiver 43, which among wide receivers is not awful, but it's ADP of 82. So he does go after all the receivers that are better than him, but he goes before, some guys that I like more, but I'm not going to, do a crazy flag plant over these guys. The problem more so is among all positions. When you have to draft Brandin Cooks, you're taking Brandin Cooks over a Darren Waller, a Deshaun Watson, a James Conner, right? A Rashad White, Zay Flowers, David Montgomery. All these guys I would much rather have over Cooks. The choice shouldn't be Brandin Cooks or Deshaun Watson. The choice should be Brandin Cooks or a guy like Tyler Boyd, who goes 20 picks and 2 rounds later. And one of the biggest issues with Cooks is it's weird that people are now coming around on him because of Dallas, when the case for Cooks has been there for years. I've been the first guy to tell you for years to draft Cooks. So in 2019 and 2020, when he was the definitive only starter for Houston, 2020 and 2021. So 2019 is the year he gets hurt with I believe it was the Rams, and then he went to New England, and then he ended up a free agent. He goes to the Texans. In 2020 and 2021, he's 8th round picks both those years, and it's, hey, just draft Brandin Cooks. This is a good player, and he's the only receiver they have. I don't care that the Texans suck. And he paid off. He didn't win you your league, but he was a great wide receiver too. And then last season, he jumps to the 5th round, and it's like, well, let's pump the brakes. It is still just the Texans. And then last season, he fails to pay off, but it was also partially due to injury. And now he's back to the 8th round, but all the excitement's gone. Brandin Cooks is an old 29 years old, pretty much 30. He's an old 30. I don't even care about the concussion history. I never have. But now it's just, even if he makes it through the season, you're getting pretty much nothing out of him. And you're paying a premium on him. And I'm good on Brandin Cooks as an 8th round pick. He's not a threat to Lamb. He's there more so for real life NFL purposes of stretching the field. You shouldn't be excited. And Michael Gallup is a similar case where, we want Michael Gallup to be this elite downfield vertical threat that his profile in his younger years showed, but it's just never manifested itself in the way that we want. He had the one top 20 year, and I understand there have been a lot of injuries, but at this point, 6th year, I can't be super hyped for Gallup. I do like him. I've certainly drafted him when he was cheaper, but he's rising now as we get into camp and people start to like the Cowboys more. And he's getting to a point now where it's, well, I don't like the price anymore. He's now wide receiver 58, ADP 128. He used to go after Van Jefferson. He used to go in the 16th round. Now it's a 12th round pick for Michael Gallup. ADP 128 is actually 11th round. That's very expensive for a guy that we've done this with now for 5 years. The will he, won't he? I'm not even going to look at advanced stats for Cooks or for Gallup. It's just logic and reasoning. I would like them to be cheaper, and I'm not threatened by them for the actual elite players on this team. And people just have Dallas so backwards. We're propping up Cooks and Gallup. We're still holding slight skepticism on Lamb and Pollard when it should just be full throttle, move it forward. And Dak slides. Dak's already fallen maybe 20 spots in ADP since the early offseason. He's now ADP 100. He used to be 85. And I've gotten Dak Prescott as late as 120. It's disrespectful for a player who just 2 years ago had 330 fantasy points and was still great last year. He was hurt. It's disrespect to Dak. The Dak respect it's really out of control right now. And don't be afraid to draft Dak Prescott. He's a very good player.
A whole lot of Dallas Cowboy players that were mentioned. I'm going to start with the least exciting one, work our way up, Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup, I believe people are still clinging to 2019, right? We saw Michael Gallup, second season in the NFL, top 15 points per game, wide receiver 17. Obviously, he's not going to reach that height there. But ever since he hit that, people have kept chasing that production, that upside, especially in best ball drafts, over and over and over. Here's the reality. 2020, that's when CeeDee Lamb joined the Cowboys. Amari Cooper was there. Michael Gallup, since 2020, hasn't averaged 11 points per game in a season in PPR, right? He is what he is. That's what I love about Michael Gallup is you're not going to get surprised. These past 3 seasons have been crazy how consistent he's been. Target share, 17.1% in 2020. Went to 16.6% in 2021. And this past season, even coming back from an ACL tear, 16.7%. That target share, lock it in, folks. It's going to be between 60.5% and 17% for Michael Gallup. And that has led to him being a fantasy non-factor. Hasn't been inside the top 40, probably hasn't been inside the top 45 wide receivers. We don't know the 2021 season where he tore his ACL, didn't play enough. He averaged 10.2 points per game. Like, people are drafting him and thinking, oh, I'm getting such a great value. You mentioned 128 overall for his ADP. It's right inside the top 60 wide receivers. But that's exactly what he is at this point. Maybe he's a little better, but that's not the players that you take. You want to take those guys that you go, oh, they can be, if I'm drafting a wide receiver 58 to 60, a guy that could be a top 36 wide receiver in fantasy. That will never happen for Michael Gallup. There's zero upside with him. It's worth noting, too, you don't have to dive into the advanced stats. As you mentioned, just look at the yards per reception. 2020, or actually 2019, 16.8. Drops 2.5 yards the next season. Drops another 1.6 yards in 2021. Bottoms out at 10.9 this past season. Yes, I know, ACL, but still, that's pretty drastic drop-off. 4 straight years of it declining, that's alarming. We need to make note of that and go, there's warning signs. There's no upside with Michael Gallup. There's just red flags with him.
This is an argument of cost. I don't dislike Gallup. I've been a Gallup chaser for years myself. I've drafted 65 Best Ball Manias up to this point. I have him 15%. I've put him on 10 teams. I'm not against Michael Gallup, but all 10 of those picks were him outside of the top 150 in ADP. Now that he's 128, I don't touch him. So with Michael Gallup, you've just missed the boat. It's just too late. You had your time if you drafted earlier. For the rest of the offseason, he's probably not going to be worth the cost.
And that segues perfect into Brandin Cooks, because I talked about Gallup and his yards per reception dropping, because that's been a big thing we've looked at with wide receivers, is looking at their season stats and going, when was there a massive, obvious drop-off in their production that can help us predict who can bounce back and who is washed. And Brandin Cooks changed his name to Brandin Cooked, right? He's done. Like, he averaged 14.2 yards per reception in 2020. It dropped all the way down to 11.5 in 2021. And this past season didn't rise much more. It was 12.3. He's been a volume receiver. That's how he's been productive in fantasy football. And that's an obvious thing. Any player that is productive has to have volume. The concern is, where does that volume come in this Cowboys offense? Going back to the top 2 guys with Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb, they combined for about 40% target share for the Cowboys last season. And I don't see that changing. If anything, I could see it maybe even going up a little bit more. Got to get Pollard more involved. So 40% of your target share is going to two guys. I mentioned with Michael Gallup that 3 straight seasons, he's been 16.5 to 17% target share. That doesn't leave much for Brandin Cooks, a whole tight end room, and other guys catching passes. I don't think Brandin Cooks tops 20% target share because when you look at last year's Cowboys team, CeeDee Lamb flirted with 30%. No one else on that Cowboys offense topped 19% target share. So let's just say maybe we give 1% to Brandin Cooks. What are we looking at with Brandin Cooks in a 20% target share? It's not going to be pretty. It's not. Like Cooks, I don't think has the speed. I think we've seen that with yards per reception going down. He's not the same receiver. It's not a knock against him either. He's played, what is this? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 seasons in the NFL. They brought in T.Y. Hilton last year, right? Hilton didn't look like the same T.Y. Hilton that we thought of. Brandin Cooks is probably a slightly better version of that. But Brandin Cooks at that ADP, you're crazy, folks. You're crazy. You can't take him at that.
No,
it's logic.
It's totally crazy. And we talked about this a few months ago with aging receivers and running backs that you do, like you were saying, you see that mini cliff of efficiency before you see the big cliff. And this is now 2 years of Brandin Cooks' mini cliff. He's a career 15 yards per reception. You get the mini cliff the last 2 years. The major cliff is coming. We now saw last year age-related injury. Even the best case scenario, like you said, 20% healthy for a whole season doesn't necessarily pay off the 8th round ADP. And it pains me. This is the first year in a half a decade I have to hate Brandin Cooks, but I do, and I would take him again if he was 3-4 rounds cheaper. I would still take the swing on him, but the cliff is knocking on the door, and at this point he's like the Wile E. Coyote. He's already ran off the cliff. We are just waiting for him to look down and actually fall, right? So maybe he still has to throw up the sign that says "Help me," but we'll see. And, CeeDee Lamb would be the road runner. He's perfectly safe and healthy and happy, having a good time. That was an old Acme cartoon reference, and that's what you get on this show. But it's rough, man. The areas we love the Cowboys compared to the areas we hate the Cowboys. The last one is Tony Pollard. We're not going to break down Tony Pollard again because I've probably done it 4 times on this show. You can go back to the old episodes or just trust me. The talent profile is there. The number one, I actually have to go to Kamara for this. The number one argument you hear against Tony Pollard, for anyone on Twitter or this and that who's like, oh, I can't really trust him, they always say the same thing. Do you really think he can handle 250 carries or earns 250 carries and doesn't get hurt? And every time I hear it, I want to bash my head into a wall because the point of what makes Tony Pollard the potential RB1 or at the very least a top 5 running back has absolutely nothing to do with carries. At no point would I expect him to even see 200 carries. In fact, I don't want him to get 250 carries. And then you look at a player like Alvin Kamara, because that's the play style we're getting out of Tony Pollard. Alvin Kamara, the 4 years that he was a beast, top 5 every season, the 1 year he was top 8, never eclipsed 200 rush attempts. That wasn't the point of what made him good. Alvin Kamara has never had a 1,000-yard rushing season. It's the 4 seasons in a row of 80 receptions. And if you don't think Tony Pollard is capable of 80 receptions, then you haven't been watching the show and you haven't been watching the NFL. Tony Pollard is more than capable of 80 receptions. And in this current Cowboys offense, it's Lamb and it's Pollard. Aaron said they combined last year for 40% of the targets. Probably pushes the 45%. Not that Lamb's going to earn more. Pollard's going to earn more. Pollard is the guy. You want Malik Davis or Ronald Jones or even a re-signing of Zeke to come in and take 150 carries or 200 carries. You don't want Tony Pollard running it 2 yards up the middle. That's just going to get him hurt. It's not worth your time for the extra 20 accumulated yards on the ground. You want these types of Alvin Kamara stats. And these are the stat lines you should expect from Tony Pollard. So again, he still goes to like the 2-3 turn. It makes no sense. I would rank Tony Pollard as high as the RB2 this year, and I don't think it's that hot of a take when you look at the whole Cowboys depth chart the way we just did, and when you say, oh, yeah, this has always been a high-end fantasy producing team. This is a regular season winning team, and the depth is not there. It's very similar to the peak year of Ben, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell. Antonio Brown was the wide receiver 1. Le'Veon Bell was the RB1. And Ben was good, but not great. Didn't necessarily win your league, but he was a startable quarterback. And that's what we have here. Aaron, any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
I think we all know that Pollard is great. And what's scary is that there is room for so much more volume. And yeah, if it's receptions, that's more desirable. But just look at the opportunity metrics. Snap share, number 30 amongst running backs. Number 30. Like barely, I guess, a quote-unquote starting running back snap share. Even in the receiving game, his route participation, just under 40%, was number 34. And he's really freaking good at being a receiver. Like, some of the things I like to do is I just go compare targets and where they rank amongst position and the receiving yards. Number 16 amongst running backs in targets, number 12 in receiving yards. They need to get them more involved. More involved in the passing game. Sure, let them lose some work on the ground. I'm totally fine with that because we know targets are worth more than a carry. So with Tony Pollard, there is volume. And just in terms of touches, he topped over 230 touches last season. He can handle that. Hopefully this year, more receptions than carries. But even if it is carries, like the only thing I'll say with the comparison between him and Kamara is so far in their career, at least Tony Pollard has hit 1,000 yards rushing, has been more efficient on the ground. Like, he's dangerous. Maybe he doesn't catch the 80 receptions that Kamara hit in his prime with the Saints, but he's much better on the ground. He'll get his yards either way. Tony Pollard being that high in fantasy this season shouldn't shock people. That's definitely within his realm of possibilities, because there's a reason the Cowboys decided to just let go of Ezekiel Elliott without anyone else currently in this backfield that could take any serious work from Tony Pollard.
But like, let's assume Malik Davis can, or Zeke comes back, or they sign someone. Look at last year. Like, Zeke was a full-time runner, and Tony Pollard was the RB8 in PPR on 39 receptions. No matter what they add, Tony Pollard's going to get about 180 rush attempts at least, at a minimum, right? And the receptions will probably double. And for those who are like, oh, how can you just project that? Well, your good old friend Kellen Moore, who all the fantasy analysts love, wanted to throw the ball down the field because analytically it doesn't make sense to dump the ball off. It makes sense to throw it more distance. You know who's going to throw it to the running back more? Brian Schottenheimer, the guy who threw it to LaDainian Tomlinson 1,000,000 times with the Jets in 2009. And then everywhere he ever went with the old school mentality. It's the thing that they hate most about the Cowboys offseason is the thing that helps Pollard the most. Everyone's got it backwards. The Cowboys analysis is flipped upside down.
And that's going to conclude this episode of Stat Masters. If you're watching the show on YouTube and you like this video, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe if you're not already, and we also do this show live on Discord. You should join the Player Profiler Discord. That's playerprofiler.com/chat. The reason why you do that is after we get done recording the show, we take questions from the audience and we help you win in fantasy football. And from Aaron and Chris, we bid you adieu until next time.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.